In this episode, we're going to talk about behavior change and one of my favorite subjects, psychology.
You're here because you want more engagement, more delight, more fun, more learning. You're hungry for change and willing to take action.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original.
Welcome to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Let's take learning to the next level.
Welcome, my friend. How are you today? Thank you so much for tuning in again. Seriously, I hope you're having a great day. But if not, then I think this will help because I have lots of awesome and interesting things to work through with you. And I think you'll find them, if anything, something that you can potentially use in your scenario design or even in your life. Isn't that cool? All right, are you excited? So basically today, as I was on my morning walk, and I hope you know that really these scenarios are a way for me, or these podcasts are a way for me to work through my ideas about scenarios, my past projects, and also reflect on some of the ways I can improve the way I share these concepts. Because let me tell you, I'm working through the next iteration of Scenario Design Secrets right now. And what happens is once you start really looking at it from the perspective of your learner, and also I'm getting a lot of great feedback from the people that have taken the course or are new to the course. They're asking me questions that I thought, hey, I talked about that. But then you revisit those lessons again and you think, oh, I totally assumed a lot of background knowledge there that I take for granted as an expert, right? Like, this is my first language. So when I'm talking to people whose language it isn't first, that's so nonsensical, then you just start saying, okay, what are some assumptions that I'm making? And then also, how can I explain this or use analogies or examples that would actually help somebody visualize this without me having to, without me losing the premise that I'm trying to share. So that's another project altogether. And it's actually one of the things I think is really cool is revisiting things you've taught, presentations you've done, workshops, and I've done this, but I'm doing it like every day that I do it. I feel like, wow, why didn't I do this earlier? Because I myself am learning so much from the teaching process. The teaching process really helps you refine your ideas. And I think it's beneficial for everybody. I think we all know this. As we train, as we teach other people how to do things, our ideas get more solidified, and we learn from ourselves. And it's funny, one of the people that I listen to very often, because in the mornings when I go to for my walks, I listen to podcasts and audiobooks. And one of the things that I love is listening to Jim Rohn. And Jim Rohn has this, he was an amazing speaker and just a fabulous human being, probably one of the most influential people in my life. And it's kind of cool because he's not even alive anymore. And so what he said is that the reason, and he was a multimillionaire when he was doing his speaking gigs late into his life. But he said the reason he goes to these things is so that every time he repeats these strategies for living a successful life, that he gets to listen to it as well. So there's this humbleness that, you could be teaching these things, but that doesn't mean you're finished learning them. You are always learning them. So for me, this podcast is me learning with you as I work through these ideas. So let me tell you, finally get to what I was going to talk about today, which is this. Okay, so let me tell you this little story. And this was, I think it was last year, and I live in Tofino, and Tofino is on the edge of Vancouver Island. And to get to Tofino, you have to drive. It doesn't seem like a really big space on the map, but it is quite windy and in some places actually quite dangerous, as the road is very tight and we have like semis and things like that coming in, logging trucks once in a while and things like that coming through this highway through the mountains. And so we were driving one day, me and my husband, and we're driving down the highway, and we're trying to catch a ferry to go to Vancouver. And so you have to drive basically 3 hours across the island to catch the ferry. And it's tight. Like, if you want to catch a morning ferry, you got to start driving at like 5 a.m. So we're driving, and it's just, we're in the middle of this highway, and it's near the flat part because everything is either, beachside, which makes it like a nice flat drive, or it's mountains, which is just crazy, rainy and misty and dangerous. And so he's driving and everything's okay. And the sun's not like rising, but it's kind of, it's dawn. So it's quasi bright, but not too bright because it was all cloudy. And we're just on time to make sure that we get to the ferry. And you really have to, like, if there's a tree that falls down, you're like delayed by 4 hours. So you're always like, I hope nothing messes up the highway, right? Because that's how precarious, that's the word, precarious it is. We're driving, and all of a sudden I see an arm in the ditch, like somebody's arm. And he keeps on driving, and I just turn like all weird and white inside. I'm just like, oh, kind of freaked out. And I say, listen, I'm sorry. And what's going through my mind? Ferry schedule. We're going to miss the ferry. But also there's a person in the ditch, and that really didn't look like a mannequin hand. And also there's nobody else around. So where are you going to find an arm, random arm, right? And so I'm like, listen, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I think I saw a body in the ditch. And so he's like, are you sure? Are you sure? And I'm like, I don't know, but it was probably like, 5 minutes back or something less than that. But so, and it's a single like lane highway, 2-way. So it's not like there's like easy loops to turn around. So like if you're going, right? So he's like, okay, let's go check on it. We go back, and sure enough, it's a body. But thankfully it wasn't like a dead one. It was a real human being. It was a real young man, and basically he drank too much, and there was like a logging like a campsite or something, and he just drank too much and basically ended up in the ditch face down. When he woke up, he was smiling, so that was positive. However, it was very terrifying approaching somebody with a face down, because I was like, please be alive, and please don't be messed up, right? Like it was so stressful. But we stopped. And almost like 2 minutes after we stopped, there was a lady that drove up beside us, and she said, oh, good, I'm glad somebody's here. And she was actually like, I don't know if she was a nurse or something, but she was just way more comfortable with like figuring out what's wrong with him and making sure that the police is called. And I called the police, and it was all resolved. But she said, yeah, I drove by and I thought I saw an arm, and then I came back. So middle of the highway, you see an arm sticking out. 2 cars go by, 2 people stop. Now, when I say 2 cars go by, it really is the truth. Like where I live, it's very remote. So seeing another human being is hard. So there's just not very many people going by. So 2 cars went by, 2 people stopped. Those are great odds of success. I hope that guy's okay. He's basically just like had a lot to drink. So the reason I'm telling you this story, two cars pass by, 2 cars stop, and you're like, humanity, people are good. And we went on our way, we caught our ferry, everything was good. Then there's this story about this lady. I don't know if you've heard about this story. This lady was murdered. Her name was Kitty Genovese. And Kitty Genovese was killed, I think, by a boyfriend or her husband. And what happened is she was killed in her neighborhood. There was 35 witnesses. All of them were in their homes, and they could hear her screams and her cries for help. And her husband, I think, or boyfriend, I'm not sure, he tried to kill her 3 times, and the 3rd time he succeeded, and he did it all outside. And so one of the things that came through from that story was that, people who live in, and I think this was kind of the common theme, is that people who live in cities become alienated from each other, and we lose our morality or something, and we lose our ability to help, or we lose our empathy, all those things. And I actually, when you look at it from that perspective, you're like, what? There's 35 witnesses. Those people are just, what's wrong with humanity, right? That's how you think. I mean, it's easy to assume that, right? Because there's 35 people and nobody, the problem wasn't that they didn't help her, because there's been, if some guy's has a knife in his hand and you're just this person walking down the street, you're not going to intervene unless you're some sort of a magic ninja. You're probably going to call the cops, right? But the thing is that nobody even called the cops. That's what's scary. And so what was really cool is that Kitty's death actually served as a psychological study, so it wasn't all in vain. She didn't die in vain. And I don't know if, obviously, that's not a cool thing to say because that's somebody's a relative or whatever, but the right people looked at it, because initially what happened was it was kind of embarrassing for everybody to know that this woman was murdered in the street, okay, but then for everybody to find out that there was 35 witnesses and nobody called the cops, that was unheard of, and it got out accidentally. So the reason I found out about this is because I was reading a book by Robert Cialdini, and the book is called Influence. And Robert Cialdini is, look him up if you ever have a chance. He is an amazing human being, and when I say amazing, I mean mad talent and persuasion. He's basically the kind of person who, and I feel like it's kind of funny how he describes himself, somebody who will fall for every trick in the book, and it makes him mad that he does so, and then what he does is he goes and figures out why that happened. Why would he buy chocolates from a Boy Scout when he doesn't even eat chocolate? But he felt guilty and spent $10, right? So not that's a bad thing. I say spend, even if you don't eat chocolate, spend all the money you can for any single young person who comes up, who has the guts to come up to your door and ask for money to fundraise. I give them everything I can, because I think that's really cool to build their confidence. Anyways, and I love chocolate. I'll eat all the chocolate they bring. But what he did is actually, the reason I found out about Kitty Genovese's story is because I read his book, and he deconstructed the reason why what happened to Kitty. And then when I read you the little excerpt from the book about what happened, I want you to think about, and I'm going to try and make the connection, and I think I will, to what we do when we design scenarios, and how this knowledge now of this interesting fact can help us. And then also, one of the things we can do is, as we learn these different psychological applications, what we can start doing is looking at what's already out there, deconstructing it, and then thinking about how we can make it better. So here's an excerpt from Cialdini's book. Very often, an emergency is not obviously an emergency. Is the man lying in the alley a heart attack victim or a drunk sleeping one off? Haha, that's pretty close to home there. Okay, back to the excerpt. Are there sharp sounds from the street gunshots or truck backfires? Is the commotion next door an assault requiring the police, or an especially loud marital spat where intervention would be inappropriate and unwelcome? What is going on? In times of such uncertainty, the natural tendency is to look around at the actions of others for clues. We can learn from the way the other witnesses are reacting whether or not the event is an emergency. What is easy to forget, though, is that everybody else observing the event is likely to be looking for social evidence too. And because we all prefer to appear poised and unflustered when we are with others, we are likely to search for that evidence placidly. So with brief, camouflaged glances at those around us. Therefore, everyone is likely to see everyone else looking unruffled and failing to act. As a result, and by the principle of social proof, the event will be roundly interpreted as a non-emergency. Social proof thus spawns, and this is a quote from an article, follows up this quote from the book, social proof thus spawns a state of pluralistic ignorance in which each person decides that since nobody is concerned, nothing is wrong. And it also produces an effect called the diffusion of responsibility. Because remember, there was 35 witnesses, not one person called the cops, whereby people assume that because there are others present, somebody else must be doing something about the emergency. So no individual feels particularly compelled to take action, which is terrifying, right? So, I mean, I get it, because this is why societies work. This is why we're able to live in, great, huge densities with each other and not like have a daily have some sort of a mental and aggressive breakdown, right? It's because we have these things built in that are in fact very beautiful. But in some ways there's also these things work against us, or they work against the individual. And so there's this really cool scenario that I think you should check out. It's still publicly available, so do it while it's up. It's called Lifesaver, and basically look up Lifesaver, LIFE-SAVER.org.uk. So .org.uk. And this was developed by a gentleman called Martin Percy that Ryan got to talk to actually last year, because we're huge fans of his work. And it was developed by Unit 9. And I don't know what kind of stuff's coming out of Unit 9, but I think they're doing some pretty cool stuff. Anyways, so Lifesaver is a basically what it is a way for an individual to learn how to act when there's like somebody falls to the ground, and you, like, let's say you are walking in a parking lot and somebody is there collapsed, and instead of just walking by or whatever, you actually get down and turn them over and say, hey, are you okay? And basically take action. So what Lifesaver teaches you, I'm not going to give it all away, but I might. Go through it. It's quite phenomenal. It's so inspirational that Ryan and I have both used it as an inspiration for our other projects, because it's that good. And so one of the things that Lifesaver does is it doesn't actually, what it does is it walks you through CPR. Are you going to be good at CPR by the end of this thing? I doubt it. I mean, I've actually done CPR on a dummy. It's so hard, and the dummy's so heavy. So, and it's very stressful. Like, even with a dummy, you're freaked out, and they tell you you're going to break ribs, and that's just like very unnerving. Learning CPR is I mean, I'm sure there's people who are like, whatever, I don't even know what I don't know what you're stressed out about. I'm like, there's a dummy and he might die if I don't do this right. So I can only imagine what it would be like if a real person had fallen down and you're trying to help them. But that's one of the things that Lifesaver's trying to address, is that any help, any attempts is better than nothing, better than a person laying there face down in their own like puke, choking to death, than actually you being able to like maybe help them clear their airway before and calling an ambulance, right? Like there's so many things that you can do. And one of the things that they're trying to reinforce is taking action. And it's kind of cool, but, scary. I remember when we actually stopped for that man in the ditch, as I said earlier, we both felt like we needed to act and that we could somehow help, even if it was just calling the police. But then the other thing that we realized is that in that moment, we didn't really know what to do. Like all that this Lifesaver actually allowed us to do, and I have gone through it several times, is to realize that I can go and help somebody. But the actual training itself is, you actually got to still do that to know what to do and for those actions to become almost tactile for you. So that made me think about the purpose of our scenarios in some ways. And definitely you have to, like when you work through something like Lifesaver, you can say, hey, yeah, now I know how to do CPR. No, you don't. Good luck with that. Even if you did it on the iPad, which is a really fun interactive experience, and it actually makes you realize how, that real CPR is actually quite a bit of work. And so believe me, try it on the iPad. It actually makes you like press things up and down, and you're just lifting an iPad. And it's like, you're like, what's 2 minutes is such a long time, right? Like you really are working your butt off. So in that aspect, it's actually great because then you're not taking it lightly. And maybe some of the things that happen is you realize how long 7 minutes is or 10 minutes is until the ambulance arrives. It's quite a long time. So it's pretty awesome. But after Ryan and I deconstructed kind of, what the scenario did, we thought, hey, I wasn't necessarily ready for that situation when it happened, but what I was ready to do is help. And so that's what I think a Lifesaver is amazing at, is it helps you shift your mindset to thinking about what you can do in that moment, and that any help is better than zero help. And so what it does is it gives you that little push to get you to adopt a certain kind of mindset that will then, after that, Ryan's like, oh, I need to take some CPR courses because let's say I have no clue what to do, or I need to do more training. So he definitely perceived that gap. It was bad that he did it right while the guy's like laying there in a ditch, but it is infinitely better than not having to stop at all and not calling the police. So when you look at Lifesaver, you see that all of those situations are people in their own, like 2 or 3 people together. Sometimes it's people that know each other, sometimes it's not, but it's small groups of people, right? So what happens is it's actually easier, as you just heard from the Cialdini story, when you have 1 or 2 people that are around, it's hard to ignore that, because then it's very hard to dissipate that responsibility because you have because you don't have a crowd, right? And so one of the things I'm thinking is that Lifesaver would work only on a certain type of situation, which is when there's small crowds of people. And maybe that's why this is so interesting, is because it's you helping a stranger, but there's only you, right? And maybe that happens a lot of times where a single person notices somebody laying in the ditch and they have to take action. Now, if we wanted to change the behavior of crowds. We could say, oh, what can we design? Can Lifesaver help people who are in those crowd situations, right? Somebody's fallen at a concert and people are just walking around. This guy's leaning up against a tree, but he looks like he's puked. Maybe he's just drunk. He's not actually having like a stroke or something like that, right? So the idea there is that you can't fix the crowd. So you have to realize the limitations and also find out ways to hack psychology. And when I say hack psychology, I mean use it to your advantage and also realize the limitations of what you're trying to do. So Lifesaver works for small groups where it's 2 or 3 people because what's happening is that the responsibility cannot be dissipated and it looks like you can easily be called on to help. And you should, right? But it would not work as a training to change people's psychology in a group setting because people's psychology in a group setting is always going to be the same. So what Cialdini suggests, and this is what's really cool, is that I guess it's kind of hard because like if you fall on your face in a lonely parking lot, there's not much you can do to get people to help you. You just hopefully, I don't know. These are all sudden things, right? You can't predict them. But what Cialdini said is that if instead of trying to influence the crowd as a whole, if you are feeling like you're getting sick or something's happening to you and you're like losing consciousness, or you think you're having a heart attack, or you've just been in an accident and people are suddenly stopped, but then they start going, you have to engage a single individual. So in that respect, what happens is we have to now start, if you want people to be helped in a crowd, you're not teaching the crowd, you're teaching the individual what they need to do to get help from people in a crowd. So one of the things he suggests is that the minute you start getting sick, you identify an individual clearly, and by what they're wearing, even saying, "You in the blue hat, I'm having a heart attack, please call 911." So you have to be very direct, very specific. You can't say, "Hey, can anyone?" because anyone is not specific enough. People will walk by. Nobody will take responsibility. So basically what happens there is you actually have to teach the individual to take care of themselves. Interesting, right? And also what I feel it does is it removes this kind of cynicism that we have about humanity, because there's a reason why people do stuff, and there's all those videos like faith and humanity restored. That's not rare. Those are not rare things. People are kind every day. People are good every day. It's just we have to figure out why. We have to look a little deeper, and then also figure out how we can structure the learning pieces that we design to work within and maximize the psychology that we already possess, because there's ways to do that well. Now, let me tell you another story. When I was in grades maybe 7 or 8, something like that, my little brother, maybe it was before that, my little brother was bullied. And I only have one brother, and he's just an amazing human being, but he's very gentle. And so, and I think that he just, because he was gentle and very polite, he was bullied. And he had this notorious bully, and the bully, like, we grew up in a very cold place called Manitoba, and the bully would steal his hat during recess, and it was just relentless. Every recess, my brother would be bullied, and he told my mom. And my mom, for a very long time, my mom raised us as a single mom, so she was Mama Bear, right? And so what she did is she went to the school, complained, and then she asked to speak to the bully. So I remember this meeting where we all sat around, and my mom sitting in front of this big kid who probably was a little kid inside, and asked, "Why would you bully my son?" in her broken English. And he was intimidated at that point and stopped bullying my brother immediately, right? She just said, why are you bothering my son? All those things. So that worked on that bully. Here's a question for you. Do you think that was the last time that my brother was ever bullied? No. And so, so here's how this works. When we designed Broken Coworker, and Broken Coworker is also something you should check out for free if you haven't already, and work through it a couple of times to deconstruct how it works. But Broken Coworker is basically a story about two people. One of them is a bully, one of them is the bullied. And we take it from the perspective of the bullied. Because what happens is a lot of times we look at a situation and we say, look at all those people being bullies. Let's just make them feel more empathetic. Let's just make them more sensitive. Let's just tell them they're bullies. And we don't like it. Now, with training, if you're doing that, or I've seen posters and people will send me this stuff and I absolutely love it. They'll say, treat these people nicer because one day they might be your boss. Yeah, that's nice. But when you really think about it and you go back to the situation with my brother, my mom is obviously meant the best for him. However, and I think that she acted in a way that she felt she wanted to protect him, but also maybe if she was bullied at school as a young child, she probably would have wanted this to happen for her parents to stand up for her. But the thing is that didn't teach my brother any skills in how to deal with emotionally charged and intimidating situations on his own. So it's almost like you gotta push back a bit and say, where can I actually make the biggest impact? Because I can either try and go out there and tackle one tyrant and bully at a time, or I can empower the person who is in some ways more sensitive or more susceptible to bullying, because there are people who are more susceptible to bullying. Like the studies have shown that children who have a tendency to cry easier than others at certain things, those children get bullied more. And I don't actually know if they cry more because they're bullied more, or they're bullied more because it doesn't take much for them to cry. So yeah, some people are just going to be a little more susceptible to that. That's normal. And some people are going to be bullies. That's also normal. But who do we really want to target? Let's target, I say, the people who are going to have to go through their lives encountering other difficult human beings. So for me, it's kind of like the idea of working through that psychology piece. Are we trying to change the crowd, or are we trying to empower the individual? And where does that social proof work for us? And where does the individual empowerment work for us in terms of psychology that we can leverage in our training? So Lifesaver really is about building confidence in the individual to take action, but it has nothing to do with how people act in crowds. The only thing that maybe might happen is as people go through and maybe understand that in a crowd, nobody will take responsibility and you cannot diffuse it, that you have to, it's like there's 50 people walking around and there's a piece of garbage laying there, that nobody's going to pick it up if you don't. And it doesn't say anything about people in a crowd. It doesn't. It really, what it does is it's just saying everybody else is like, okay, yeah, this is normal. So don't make yourself stick out and do something silly because you'll look silly, right? That's kind of a lot of people think about, like, how am I going to look? And there's this other thing that I'm going to leave you with, and I think this is kind of important because one of the things that I talked about with Ryan, and like we watch a lot of documentaries, and one of the documentaries that I watched was about this. He's an illustrator and just a genius mastermind. His name is Hayao Miyazaki. You may have heard of him, and if you haven't, oh my gosh, I've just introduced you to a magical world of dreams and magic and dragons. Hold on, let me tap some of my soon-to-be very cold coffee. So, why am I bringing up Mr. Miyazaki? So, when we think about social situations and we're trying to address bullying in the workplace, and it's funny because I had this conversation actually just a couple of weeks ago with somebody else, and it was about chefs. So sometimes it's not necessarily somebody feeling bullied has nothing to do with the people around them. It has to do with their own internal confidence meter, and also cultural. And when I say cultural, I don't mean like cultural like you're from another country. I mean cultural as in, to me, culture is something that could be your family. Like you know, everybody looks. You could walk around a neighborhood in any city, and everybody looks like they all have lived there for years and years. But you go into a separate home, and what they do with their little microculture could be completely different than the people living next door. Even though on the outside everybody's driving the same car and has the same, shops the same, has the same thing for dinner. There's lots of different nuances to culture. And we were talking about how culture changes even from workplace to workplace. And so it's very, very difficult, even when you're coming in, like let's say from the head office, and you're trying to establish culture in an office that's, let's say, in a different country or even in a different state, and you're trying to affect the culture from the outside in. And the way we perceive that culture as outsiders could be off. So to me, figuring out how to empower the individual is always going to be priority. Because if you look at, and I'm going to come back to this one more time, anybody who worked for Steve Jobs, if you actually watch any documentaries or anything with Steve, he wasn't a wonderful person. He was like, there was a public side to him that was very nice, but the private side to him was very driven and very focused. And he did a lot of things that people would have called kind of not nice. And he was a tyrant boss and all those other things. Now, when you watch the documentaries with him, anybody looking at probably those interactions with, like, if you came in and you just observed how Jobs interacted with his team, you probably would have been like, that guy is such a bully. Let's give him a training, some sort of a bully training, and make him feel empathy for all the people that when they go home, they're stressed. And then when you actually listen to those people, in a moment they're stressed, but every single one of them said that was the most awesome, creative, and productive time of their life because he pushed them so hard. And they came up with just amazing things. And even though in the moment they didn't like it, they enjoyed that drive and that push and being a part of something greater because he had vision. So that's cool. That's one way of looking at how cultural spaces are, even a workplace. What we perceive as a bully, do you think that maybe if Steve Jobs would have been much nicer to everybody, they would have made the kind of strides that that Apple made? Maybe, but maybe not. But who are we to judge? Like, that's just, if those people wanted to leave, they could have left. And it's kind of funny because the reason I brought up the Hayao Miyazaki documentary, which is called, this is so cool, The Kingdom of Dreams and is it Monsters? Oh no, The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness. And it's weird because I think that has like a really scary title. Miyazaki has created children's stories, some of the most beautiful animated stories ever. One of my favorite ones is Ponyo, it's just phenomenal when you see what he was trying to achieve is a story through the life of like a 3 or 4 year old child. It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. I recommend you watch anything that you can get your hands on by Miyazaki because his storytelling is phenomenal. But so what happens in the documentary is they let you observe the workplace. And so there's Miyazaki. He always wears his apron because he's an illustrator. So he illustrates hardcore still to this day. And he wears his apron as his uniform. He chain smokes like crazy. And then he has a whole team of people working with him on these stories. Now, when he walks around and the way he talks to people and the way he gives them feedback, the minute I kind of was looking at this, I thought, this guy is crazy. He's so mean. He's such a tyrant. And it's funny because when you listen, the people that are working in that office, once again, the same kind of thing. They're like, yeah, he was tough, but also he gave me feedback. And they realize that they're studying under a master. And it's almost like he's giving them this tough love, right? And I had this discussion with somebody the other day, and it was about how, chefs, when chefs work at a busy kitchen, that they shouldn't be, you don't have to yell at people to get them to perform. And I was like, you know what? Then those people could go away. Like, I know chef culture is chef culture, and there's chefs who yell and there's chefs who don't. And chefs who yell, maybe they get things done differently, but in the end, you can always work at a different kitchen. The chef doesn't have to, when you're running a Michelin star restaurant and you've gotten to that level, it's not our job to say you got to be nice. Our job is to say, that guy's someplace awesome. And I mean, obviously there are, like we've talked about harassment, like the Weinstein situation, right? Where somebody really takes advantage of their, position and uses it to gain things. But if we're talking about basically people like Miyazaki, people like Jobs, people like, who else is, I think, what's his name, that famous chef? I'm thinking of the one who's always called like a terrible bully and that he yells too much. Oh, my favorite chef, Gordon Ramsay. Actually, I know that everybody thinks that if you actually look at some of those things with Gordon Ramsay, like his show, the best one is actually, if you guys want to see the best one, is the first one that he did when he was in the UK. Because those were, I think, more real. Then Hollywood got involved and everything became really special and different. But the first ones, he would come in there and just like scare the hell out of people. And really, like, when you really think about that, why is he doing that? If you think you can run a kitchen and have like vermin running around or serve people terrible food or not follow protocol or just slack, you need a kick in the butt. And he did that. He gave people that kick in the butt. And then you know what he did? If you actually watch the show, he created a team. And he knew that through creation of that team, he came in as he knew his role, which was to come in as this outside tyrant, shake things up a bit, have them like recognize each other's strengths, how they were a team. And then when he left, everybody hugged him and he was wonderful because he created this unified community of people who collaborate together. And it was wonderful. And I think he really recognized that his role was to come in there and just shake things up and also in some ways shame them a little. I mean, they're serving food and they're doing a terrible job, right? So for people who are like, that's not an approach. Sometimes that works for people. And I don't think we have to judge that. I think we have to say, does it work in this context? Is it producing the results I want? Does everybody have to be, does everybody have to be sweet and kind and empathetic? Not always, because that sometimes wastes so much time and it coddles people into believing they don't have to perform. And in some cases, maybe that's the culture. That's okay, because people can always switch jobs. But if you work in places where you are, let's say, if you had a chance to work under Steve Jobs and you love the pressure, why not? It probably, like, if you see the interviews, people miss him because he drove them, because he was driven, and that he definitely lacked certain things. But we didn't need to change Steve. We just needed to make sure that we know that Steve has a vision and we can help him. And are we willing to put up with his, his outbursts because we know we're a part of something greater, and that's just his approach. And maybe the reason he's a visionary is because those other areas of his personality are definitely lacking, because he has doubled down on something that's very strong. So there's different leadership styles, and will he be remembered as a great team leader? Probably not, but will he be remembered as a visionary that drove people to achieve more than? Definitely. Is that the style of Elon Musk? I don't think so. He comes off as, I think, very driven, but there's other things that he does, and he's definitely really good at public relations, I think. But that's just a different style of leadership. And it's just a different approach. We don't all have to be the same. And if we were, oh God, how boring would the life be if everybody was the same, right? So here's what I'm thinking. Leverage psychology. Figure out, because psychology can help you determine who you need to target, who your target audience is. And sometimes if you're, one of the things that comes up when we're doing our training is that it says, this training will not help because the culture is not helpful. Well, maybe it's not, we have to, instead of trying to fix culture or blame culture for inaction at a company, we say, what can we do for the individual? Where can we meet the individual to help them either cope with the culture better, change the culture from the ground up, or just decide that this isn't for them, and actually get somebody else in there who is more attuned to responding to that culture. And also, that kind of happens a lot, like when I'm doing my workshops and things like that, I do work through Kathy Moore's action mapping, and culture comes up a lot. And action mapping is just a way to do needs analysis, which I'll talk about in a different podcast. But then when you think about really, and I hope you're finding this helpful in thinking about maybe your own projects, because every time I read something new, I think about, did I pick the right target audience there? Am I attaching it or approaching it from the angle that I should be? Because in the end, it is, what we're trying to do is not help masses of people. We're in the end talking to just one person in front of their computer. And can we engage them enough to have some sort of a fundamental shift in their thinking, just long enough for them to take action? Because what we might be doing is either A, approaching it from top down, which is in most cases counterintuitive, because you're trying to change the crowd versus trying to impact the individual. And then the other thing that we have to think about is the example that I gave you with when Ryan came up to that person in the ditch, and he said, after reflection said, I I remember going through Lifesaver several times, and what it did is it gave me the confidence to take action, but all those things I worked through didn't give me the skills yet to actually be able to perform CPR. He's like, maybe I would have guessed, but it wasn't. I need a lot more training. So when you think about your scenarios, that's really what you're trying to do, and I think that's what's in the scope of reality for us. Is think about that your scenarios are not necessarily there to teach people how to do something, because first you have to get them ready to act to do something. So behavior change cannot be applied to people, to minds that are not ready for it. The only way we can actually affect behavior change is by prepping the mind first to be ready for that change. It's like, when you get that book from somebody and they're like, book's going to change your life. And you're like, yeah, okay, sure. You read the first few pages or whatever, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's great, put it down. 3 years later, something happens and you're like, oh yeah, there's this book. You read the book and you're like, wow, I wish I knew this 3 years ago. No, you weren't ready for it. And so that book, that useful stuff that sat there, was not accessed because you were not ready to access it. And that happens all the time to our learners. So what happens is we're giving them the book and we're saying, how come nothing happened? They weren't ready for it. So how can you prime their mind? How can you build their confidence? How can you help them perceive a gap so that they pick up the book? And the book here is metaphorical. The book could be a job aid. The book could be reaching out to a mentor. The book could be a book. The book could be a training manual, all those things. The book could be either really practical e-learning modules where they actually get to, practice using software with a customer account, all those things. But what are you doing? What are we doing to prep them to take the first step? Behavior change does not happen by, if you put a person in a room with a whole bunch of manuals and say, okay, we're just going to, and let's say all the manuals were about how to put out a fire. That would not make them a firefighter. They would actually need to want to be one first. They'd have to make the decision to become a firefighter. So if we're trying to stop, let's say, bullying or harassment in a workplace, we have to somehow give our learners the confidence to take on the task of becoming more assertive or more confident, whatever that is. So we have to do that first, and then we can start teaching them strategies on how to stand up for themselves. Because if you just say to somebody, okay, well, next time a bully bullies you, you just say no. Okay, sure, that's a great strategy. I don't believe I can do it. I don't believe that that'll work. If my belief systems are not aligned with the action you want them to take, they'll never take it because they're not ready for it. They're like, yeah, whatever. That only works for people who are like physically strong or people who are, it's easy for you to say that you've never been bullied. So you have to overcome all those mental, psychological roadblocks before you get them to that point. And so one of the things we also have to realize is that there's a ton of stuff at the back end there, the how-to, but our job is to prime that person to get them ready. And sometimes our job with the things that we release, when you look at something at Lifesaver, I don't know if Martin Percy actually intended this, but what he's doing there is he is building confidence. He's not necessarily building competence. He's building confidence and helping people practice being a first responder. Not being a competent first responder, but being in the state of readiness and being okay, no matter how scared, of helping and taking that first step. So you definitely have some things to think about. I certainly think about this all the time, and I'm glad you're letting me work through it on this podcast. Hope you found it useful. Any questions or any comments, I'd love to hear them. This is also posted on YouTube, so you can also post your comments there. You can email me, Anna at eLearnerEngaged. And also, if you like this stuff, if you like this podcast, let me know. The best way to let me know is either go to iTunes and write me a review or give me a thumbs up and let me know that you're enjoying and you want more of this content. So I hope you have a fabulous rest of the week, my friend, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.
You're listening to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Zabramowitz.